In 2025, the U.S. is getting stricter than ever. 15 Asian countries are now facing visa bans, and the list might surprise you. 15. Cambodia. The story begins with a decision that rippled quietly but deeply. The United States suspended certain visas for Cambodian officials. This move wasn't random. It came after Cambodia repeatedly refused to take back its deported nationals. Washington saw this as a lack of cooperation, a diplomatic snub that couldn't go unanswered, but there's more to the tension than paperwork. Cambodia has faced criticism from the international community for alleged human rights abuses, including crackdowns on political opposition and media freedom. These accusations have stained the country's global image, making visa sanctions feel, to some, like overdue accountability rather than pure politics. Beyond the politics, everyday Cambodians are starting to feel the sting. Tourism, trade, and foreign programs that rely on American partnerships are slowing. For families hoping to visit loved ones or study abroad, doors that were once open now feel shut tight. In a globalized world, isolation carries a cost, and Cambodia might be paying more than it expected. Your teen, Bhutan. Far from the spotlight, Bhutan rarely makes international headlines, but that changed in 2025. The United States added Bhutan to its visa ban red list, catching many by surprise. The decision came without much noise, but its impact was felt immediately by students, professionals, and families hoping to travel abroad. Part of the reason may lie in Bhutan's quiet diplomacy. Unlike many of its neighbors, Bhutan maintains limited formal relations with Washington. This distance might have played against it, with American authorities choosing easier targets when applying sweeping visa policies. In a way, Bhutan's neutrality became a liability rather than a shield. What hurts the most for many Bhutanese is the loss of opportunity. Students planning to study in American universities found their dreams abruptly stalled. Cultural and academic exchanges that once built bridges have now turned into dead ends. And in a country where tourism is vital, even indirect bans carry economic weight that can't be ignored. 13. Laos. Unlike some of its neighbors, Laos didn't expect to be caught in a storm of international restrictions, but that's exactly what happened. The United States introduced a partial visa suspension that hit hardest among tourists, students, and migrants. It wasn't a total ban, but the effect was immediate and disruptive for thousands. The root of the issue stems from something often hidden from public view: deportation logistics. Laos, according to U.S. authorities, has refused to accept certain nationals being sent back. This lack of cooperation triggered sanctions under long-standing immigration rules. For Washington, this was a legal response, not a diplomatic choice. But policies on paper quickly turn into personal stories. Laotian students, some already accepted into American schools, suddenly found themselves blocked by bureaucracy. Families, with dreams of reunion, were left in limbo. And travelers once eager to explore or invest abroad now face months or even years of delay. The frustration in Laos continues to grow, as many feel punished for decisions made far above their heads. 12. Myanmar. It started with a quiet but heavy blow, a partial suspension of visas that affected students, professionals, and even tourists. Myanmar, still reeling from internal unrest, was suddenly on the radar of the United States for all the wrong reasons. The move came as part of a broader message. The U.S. is watching how nations handle their people. At the heart of the ban were long-standing concerns about human rights, reports of military crackdowns, the treatment of ethnic minorities, and limits on free speech drew international condemnation. The visa restriction was more than a policy decision, it was a symbol of diplomatic disapproval from a global power, and the ripple effect came fast. Myanmar's economy, already fragile, suffered new pressure as travel and international programs began to dry up. Foreign investors grew hesitant, and students aiming to study abroad were left in uncertainty. The country found itself not only politically, Isolated, but now also cut off from one of the world's biggest gateways, the United States. 11. Pakistan. This time, the United States didn't go straight to a ban. Instead, it gave Pakistan a warning shot. The country was placed on a 60-day probation, with American officials demanding better cooperation on security and background checks. The clock started ticking, and the pressure was undeniable. Behind the decision were long-standing security concerns. U.S. authorities cited weak information sharing and gaps in Pakistan's vetting of travelers. In a world where terrorism remains a top fear, these oversights were seen as too risky to ignore. For the U.S., prevention took priority over diplomacy. But this temporary status brought more than just political noise. It created real anxiety for students, workers, and families who rely on U.S. visas. Many Pakistani citizens were left waiting, unsure whether their futures abroad would still be possible. As bilateral tensions rose, trust between the two countries took another hit, and the consequences are still unfolding. 10. Afghanistan. For many Afghans, the door to the United States did not just close, it slammed shut. In 2025, all visa categories were suspended, marking a complete halt in the travel and immigration. The U.S. cited rising concerns over who was being allowed in, especially under the shadow of Taliban control. Since the Taliban returned to power, fears about proper vetting, forged documents, and extremist infiltration have dominated the conversation. For American authorities, the risk was simply too high. They claimed that in a post-withdrawal world, the systems once trusted to check identities could no longer be counted on. But the human cost of this decision is heartbreaking. Families separated by war are unable to reunite. Students with scholarships have been left behind. And those who once helped U.S. forces translators, contractors, aid workers are now stranded, feeling forgotten. This visa freeze didn't just block flights, it blocked futures. 9. Iran. Tensions between Iran and the United States are nothing new, but in 2025 they reached a boiling point. A full suspension of all visa categories was announced, affecting everyone from students to professionals. It was one of the strictest measures Washington had taken in recent years. The root cause? A clash over Iran's controversial nuclear program. U.S. officials pointed to a lack of transparency and ongoing enrichment efforts as serious global threats. In response, they chose to tighten borders, signaling that diplomacy had reached its limits, at least for now. Yet one of the most painful outcomes was the collapse of cultural bridges. Iranian students were suddenly cut off from U.S. universities. Artists, scholars, and even athletes saw doors close. What had once been quiet, but meaningful exchanges turned into silence, leaving many to wonder when dialogue would resume. 8. Syria. There was a time when Syrians dreamed of escaping war and starting fresh in the United States, but that path is now blocked completely. In 2025, the U.S. issued a total visa ban, halting every type of entry. It was a firm response to what Washington viewed as an increasingly unstable and dangerous region. The Syrian civil war, now more than a decade old, continues to create chaos. Extremist groups still operate in several parts of the country, and the lack of centralized control has raised red flags. For American officials, the inability to safely verify travelers' backgrounds meant one thing: shut the door to all. But for Syrian families, this decision cut deep. Many have loved ones already in the United States hoping to reunite or seek medical help. Refugees trying to escape unimaginable conditions now face an even tougher road. With the U.S. ban in place, what little hope remained is dimmed, and many are left wondering where to turn next. 7. Yemen. Yemen's place on the U.S. visa ban list was not unexpected, but it was still devastating. In 2025, the United States imposed a full suspension of visas, halting all movement for Yemenis trying to reach American soil. The justification: national security and rising instability within Yemen's borders. The presence of terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula was a key factor in the decision. With parts of the country under the control of extremist groups, American officials argued it was impossible to ensure safe and thorough background checks. It was a case of risk versus reward, and Washington chose caution. But behind the headlines are the lives of ordinary people. Families hoping to reunite, students trying to start school, and refugees fleeing violence now find themselves trapped. The ban didn't just block travel, it blocked survival for some. Yemenis in crisis are left with even fewer lifelines as one of the last safe exits in their eyes is now completely sealed. 6. North Korea. Few countries in the world remain as closed off as North Korea, and in 2025, that isolation grew deeper. The United States imposed a full suspension of visas, effectively cutting off any remaining chance for official travel between the two nations. The decision was swift, stern, and final. The reasoning was no secret. North Korea's continued push for nuclear weapons and its refusal to engage with international monitoring agencies raised alarms in Washington. For American officials, dialogue had stalled for too long. With no transparency, no agreements, and no trust, they saw no option but to enforce a complete ban. While North Korea's leadership shrugged off the sanctions, its people paid the price. Opportunities for diplomacy, academic exchange, and humanitarian travel disappeared overnight. Citizens already disconnected from the world were now sealed tighter behind political borders. In a country already silenced, the silence grew heavier. 5. Libya. Not long ago, Libyans had growing hopes of reconnecting with the wider world. But in 2025, the United States shut its doors completely with a total visa ban. This sweeping decision halted student plans, career dreams, and family reunifications in an instant. Behind the policy was a country still trapped in instability. Armed groups, political chaos, and the threat of extremism made U.S. officials question how to safely vet travelers. With no stable central government in place, the U.S. viewed Libya as too risky for open access. For Libyan professionals and students, the damage was personal. Many lost scholarships, job offers, or opportunities to escape the conflict. The U.S. was a symbol of hope, but that hope now feels distant. As other nations hesitate to engage, Libya's isolation deepens and its people are left with fewer paths forward. 4. Somalia. The situation in Somalia has long been fragile, but in 2025, the U.S. made it official a full visa ban with no exceptions. The move effectively blocked all legal entry for Somali citizens, closing off a path that many had relied on for education, work, and safety. It was a harsh step that sent shockwaves through the Somali diaspora. The U.S. justified the ban by pointing to the continued activity of al-Shabaab and the country's unstable governance. Without a strong central authority to verify identity or background information, U.S. officials said it was impossible to maintain secure visa processing. In their eyes, national security outweighed humanitarian or diplomatic concerns. But the human impact of that decision hit hard. Somali American families were left in limbo, unable to bring over relatives or reconnect with loved ones. Students lost scholarships, refugees were stranded, and dreams were deferred overnight. For a nation already burdened by hardship, the visa ban only added another wall between its people and the rest of the world. 3. Sudan. Sudan entered 2025 already weighed down by crisis, and then came the visa ban. The United States imposed a full suspension, cutting off access across all visa categories. It wasn't just about paperwork, it was a signal that Washington had lost patience with Sudan's internal disorder. The roots of this action go deep. Years of political unrest, military coups, and past ties to terrorist groups left a trail of distrust. While Sudan has tried to reposition itself on the world stage, those efforts have often been overshadowed by fresh instability. For the U.S., granting visas without reliable vetting was simply too great a gamble. The impact was immediate and painful. Families seeking reunification were left in limbo, and Sudanese students faced cancelled plans and frozen futures. The ban also slowed Sudan's efforts to rebuild international credibility. Instead of opening up to the world, the country found itself further isolated at a time when connection was needed most. 2. Bangladesh. In 2025, Bangladesh was hit with a targeted but powerful move. The United States imposed visa restrictions on individuals linked to election interference. This wasn't a blanket ban, but the message was clear: Washington was watching closely. The announcement sent a ripple through Dhaka's political circles and drew attention across the region. The backlash from the Bangladeshi government came fast. Officials denounced the decision as foreign interference, further straining already delicate relations between the two countries. Tensions rose not only diplomatically but also across the media and public opinion. For many, it felt like the start of a larger political standoff rather than a simple visa issue. Beyond politics, the impact landed hardest on students and young professionals. Many faced delays or outright rejections of visa applications to U.S. schools and programs. Dreams of studying abroad or launching international careers were suddenly thrown into uncertainty. The consequences of this policy reached far beyond government halls. They struck at the hopes of an entire generation. 1. Philippines. When news broke that the Philippines was once again facing U.S. visa restrictions, the reaction was immediate and loud. In 2025, tensions resurfaced over deportation disputes with the U.S., accusing Manila of not cooperating in taking back its nationals. This triggered a policy reversal that touched every corner of the Filipino global community. At the center of the storm is the sheer number of Filipino applicants. The Philippines ranks among the highest in visa applications for work, family reunification, and study. That meant the consequences of this action weren't limited, they were massive. Embassies became flooded with questions, and families were left in limbo as processes froze overnight. The public outcry was impossible to ignore. Filipinos across the globe from California to Dubai voiced their frustration. Online campaigns began, politicians demanded answers, and quiet diplomacy turned into urgent negotiations. For many, the U.S. isn't just a destination, it's part of their future. And now, that future feels more uncertain than ever before. Do you think the U.S. was right to include the Philippines in this list, or was it an unfair decision that punishes innocent people? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. Also, where in the world are you watching this from? If you haven't seen our last video about countries secretly added to the visa blacklist in 2024, go check it out. It gives even more context to what's happening now. And if you know someone who's planning to travel, study, or work abroad, share this video with them. They need to see this before making any move.